All right. Welcome everyone to the IETF Administrative and Operations Plenary. Can somebody just confirm that they can hear me?
I hear you loud and clear.
Loud and clear.
Excellent. Thank you. So thanks everyone for joining. We can go to the next slide, please. So just a couple of reminders. Folks have probably gotten used to Meet Echo by this point in the week, but just in case this is the first session that you're joining, your audio and video are muted automatically when you join, and we're asking that you only unmute when you get recognized in the queue. So during the open mic portions, if you want to speak, please join the queue, and I'll recognize you and then you can speak. You're welcome to turn on your video when you're speaking in the queue, and use of a headset is strongly recommended. If you need more guidance, there's a link there to the participant guide. Next. So here's our agenda for today. We'll start with a welcome and brief updates from the leaders of the various different groups, myself, Miria for the IAB, Colin Perkins for the IRTF, and Barbara Stark for the NOMCOM, and then Jay Daly and Jason Livingood for the IETF LLC. Next. We'll have a memorial section this time, the presentation of the Jonathan B. Postel Award, and then we'll have the 3 open microphone sessions for the IESG, the IAB, and the IETF LLC. So that's our full agenda for this time. Next slide. Special thanks goes to our host for this meeting, Cisco. We really can't pull these meetings off or fund the IETF in general without the generous support of our meeting hosts. So many thanks to Cisco for supporting this time around. Next. And also huge thanks go out to everyone who helped make this online meeting happen. We are definitely still adapting to the online format, and so much work goes in behind the scenes in order to give everyone the experience that we're having this week. So Secretariat, Meet Echo, NOC, the LLC staff, the tools team, and the hackathon support team, everybody's been working together to have the meeting come off mostly without too many glitches, and so we really appreciate all of that effort in this unusual year that we're having here with the online meetings. Next. So we'll start with a report from myself and from the IESG, talk a little bit about the impact of COVID-19 on the IETF. Look at our typical participant statistics, and talk a little bit about planning for future meetings and small change that we're making to the BOF request process for IETF 110. So I know that there's been kind of questions and interest about the impact of the pandemic on the productivity of the IETF and participation in the IETF. Within the IESG, we've generated a little bit of quantitative data to try and get a handle around this. So I'll share a little bit of that with all of you. So one measure we thought about looking at was the mailing list traffic, and this is for all of the public mailing lists that we run. So what we're looking at here is the 3-month moving average of number of messages posted per month, and comparing 2019 to 2020. And you can, if you remember, this onset of the pandemic in most of the world was in the March timeframe. So comparing last year to this year, what we see is actually a slight uptick in the mail volume. Hard to draw too many conclusions for this. I think if it had plummeted dramatically, that would tell us something. But overall, in terms of mailing list activity, we are matching or slightly above where we were last year. The other thing that I would say is that we've only gathered the data here for this year and last year. We don't know what the typical variance is from year to year. That's something that we could try to put together to understand this data a little bit better, but we haven't done that yet. Next. So we also thought to look at the internet draft posting activity. Same constraints around this data here. If we compare last year and this year, we're looking quite similar. And as you can see, there's also there's seasonal variation, and we aren't really through to the end of the year here. The data that we had for 2020, we only did until through October, given the date that it is now. And we usually have this, spike before, right at the draft deadline. So you can see that reflected in the graph. But overall, in terms of drafts posted, we're looking quite similar from last year to this year. Next. We also looked at 0-0 drafts, so a subset of the previous data, looking specifically at 0-0 drafts as kind of a extremely rough proxy of new work coming into the IETF. And again, the caveat here is we don't know what the more typical year-over-year variance is, but if we compare last year to this year, it does seem that for pockets of this year, we're a bit below where we were last year, so possibly reflecting some dampening of generation of new 0-0s based on the pandemic or potentially other factors. We can't really draw conclusions, but that's what we saw in terms of the numbers for 0-0s. So that's kind of what the quantitative data shows, a little tiny window there. But I think kind of reflecting on the experience this year, that the numbers really don't tell you the whole story, or even close. I think it's safe to say it's been a very hard year globally because of the pandemic. And, it would be nice if the simple things that we do to get our laptops or wireless access points working, like unplugging them and plugging them back in, is something that we could do to solve this pandemic, but of course it isn't. I think that having not had in-person meetings this year, we all realized that the tremendous value that we derive from occupying a physical space together, and that it's very hard to imitate that without being in that physical space together for those who attend the meetings in person. And so as a result, I think some of the the ties that bind us together have developed a little bit of slack, or maybe frayed a little bit. And I know for myself that that's an experience not specific to the IETF, but is kind of something that I'm experiencing in general. That not being able to see people in person makes you feel more distant. Creates that distance between you and those in your life. And so first, I would just want to thank everybody for their continuing dedication to the IETF, and for really continuing to drive the engine of internet evolution and innovation forward. I think we are seeing, whether the numbers are down a little bit or not, we're seeing a lot of activity and a lot of active participation in the IETF still. And so I'm really thankful for that, and for all the efforts that people continue to put in to serving the mission of the IETF. It's really gratifying, and I think this week's meeting is just the latest evidence of that. And secondly, if you go to the next slide, we in the ISG are always open to ideas for how we can bridge this gap better, how we can make the experience of the IETF better, whether we're meeting in person or not, for some longer period of time. So please feel free to bring your suggestions to the open mic today or to email us. There are email addresses is on the slide. One thing we've talked about within the IESG is just the need to have more kind of informal one-to-one or small group catch-ups with people in the community, and that's something that I've really fallen down with myself, just based on not seeing people in person and having other constraints on my time, and I think that's probably true for lots of us, and so that's something that we've talked about trying to step up to fill in the gap that we feel by not seeing each other in person. But there's certainly other things that we can do, and we'd be really happy to hear people's suggestions for that. So we are open to that feedback. Next. So these are the participant statistics for this meeting. North of 1,200 registrations, which if we compare to 108, which was the meeting that we had in July, it's kind of similar, about somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 70 more registrations at this meeting than we had at 108. We had 250 people apply for fee waivers. Similarly, it's a slight uptick from 108, and 284 hackathon registrations. These are all just the registration numbers. These are not the participation numbers, because we won't have those until after the meeting is over, based on people joining later in the week. We do have, for registered participants, our country breakdown there. You can see it's fairly similar to what it, kind of a typical in-person meeting, depending on the geographic location of the meeting. So good spread across the world there. Next. So this has been announced on the mailing list sometime back, the IETF announcement list, but just to make sure everybody is aware, the next IETF meeting, which is originally planned to take place in Prague in March, will be an online meeting as well. So IETF 110 will be online, and it's a little bit earlier in the year than our typical March meeting, and happening in the second week of March. Next. So we're continuing to try to refine this online meeting experience, and the best way that we can do that is by getting a lot of feedback from the community about how they think things are going and what can be done better. And there's several different ways that that feedback can be provided. If you're having technical issues during the meeting, then we have both a MeetEcho ticket queue. You can send email to create a ticket about a particular issue, or you can join MTD on Jabber and flag the issue and try to get it resolved that way. For feature requests, which is not like I have a bug that's preventing me from participating, but rather, here's something I'd like to see the platform do in the future, you can send those to the Tools Discuss mailing list, and those are being tracked for improvement between now and IETF 110. There will also be a meeting survey that goes out at the end of the week, and that is super valuable for planning future meetings. We reach a really broad audience that way, so every one of you who can fill it out, that feedback really helps us, and you should see a link to that on the 109 attendees list, as well as the IETF announcement list. And then for longer term planning, we have the Stay Home, Meet Only Online working group, the SHMOO working group, which will be meeting this Friday at 5 o'clock UTC. And the mailing list is the Many Couches mailing list. At the meeting later this week, there's going to be discussion about many different aspects of meeting planning, from fees, ideas about having asynchronous meetings, the cadence and length of online meetings, how we do remote hackathons, considerations for when to cancel meetings, the design of the show of hands tool that we're using for the first time here at 109. So if you have any interest in any of those topics or other topics for longer term meeting planning in a remote setting, then please put that on your calendar and come talk to us at SHMOO. Next. So for IETF 110, we are going to do another slight little change and experimentation with the BOF timeline and process. So typically we would have the BOF deadline a little bit closer to the meeting itself. For IETF 110, we're going to move that BOF deadline back just a bit to give the ISG and the IE more time to work with BOF proponents to refine their proposals before a final decision gets made about whether BOFs will be scheduled for IETF 110. And as I noted earlier, the meeting itself is a little bit earlier in the year, so we really wanted to flag this for people far in advance so that everyone is aware of these deadlines. So for the next round, the BOF request deadline will be January 12th. And the process for submitting a BOF request is the same, sending email to IESG@IETF.org and posting an entry in the BOF wiki, and there's instructions for what to put in that entry if you visit the wiki page. We'll do a preliminary assessment. The IESG and the IAB will look at all the proposals and have a chat about them kind of preliminarily shortly after the deadline. And then we'll have a couple of weeks period where we can work together with the BOF proponents, gather more information, try to do some refinements before making the final assessment just before the BOF approval deadline at the end of January. So that's the plan for the next round, and we'll see, hopefully this makes the process go a little bit more smoothly. Next. So try to keep it brief here because I know people don't like sitting through long plenary. So there's lots more topics covered online. We processed one appeal in the last cycle. It was actually right after the plenary at the last meeting. And there's more reports from the IAB, the LLC board secretariat, IANA. All of that is in the meeting materials section of the data tracker, and we of course post regular updates about a variety of topics to the IETF blog, so I encourage people to check that out. Next slide, on to the IAB.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Mia Kulevind, and I give you very quickly an update of what the IAB is doing. I only have a few slides, so I won't take too much time of your sparse virtual time. We can go on the next slide. One more, I guess. There's a full report which you can find in the proceedings. And I'm just noticing that I didn't add an additional bullet point here, also mentioning very briefly that we got one appeal this time. We processed as well in the IAB, so you can look that up in the report. In this presentation, I would just highlight some other things that happened recently and might be interesting for you. Next slide. Yesterday, we held the IAB open meeting. So that's the second time we're doing this. So far, I think feedback was positive. What we're trying to do in the meeting is really to talk about the technical and architectural work the IAB is doing. So we give feedback on, or like we present what we did in terms of drafts, workshop, and programs. You can find all the information, proceedings, and the recordings online, of course. As always, if you have feedback about this concept, you can send it directly to the IAB, or you can join a published discussion on the architecture discuss list on that. Next slide. Also, something that might be interesting, and more information has been presented in the IAB open meeting yesterday, was that we held just last week, also conflicting maybe with some other stuff, an IAB workshop. The workshop contained 3 sessions of 2 hours each on Monday, Friday, Wednesday, and Friday. So I think the setup worked quite well. This was the first time we held a virtual workshop. There was also very good discussion about, effects that we have observed during this pandemic and things we need to learn, or we need to document, or we need to work on. All the recordings are online as well, and the IAB is currently working on a report. Next slide. And with that, I would like to point you at, or first would like to thank you to all our appointees. We appointed one new person for the RSAC committee. And that's Tim April, thank you. And then we have two current calls out there. One is for feedback on the ICANN Technical Liaison Group appointment, and the other one is for nominations for the Internet Society Board of Trustees. So if you have input for that, please send it to the IAB. And with that, I think I'm done.
Okay, thanks. This is the IETF report. My name is Colin Perkins. I'm the IETF chair. Next slide, please. Next one. Okay, so the IETF is a parallel organization to the IETF, which does research rather than engineering. We're organized as a set of research groups. Those highlighted in dark blue on this slide are still to meet later this week. The computation in the network group, which I believe is tomorrow, the congestion control group, which I think is on Friday, and network management also, I think, tomorrow. If you're not familiar with the IETF, please read our FC 7418, and that gives you a really nice primer for what we do, targeted at people who are familiar with the way the IETF works. Next slide, please. In addition to the research groups, one of the other things we do in the IETF is run the Applied Networking Research Prize in conjunction with the Internet Society. The Applied Networking Research Prize is awarded to recognize the best recent results in applied networking, to try and recognize interesting new ideas of potential relevance to the Internet standards community that are coming out of the research world, and to try and recognize upcoming people that are likely to have an impact on Internet standards and technologies. In particular, it's got a focus on trying to bring out the people and the ideas that would not otherwise get much exposure in or be able to participate in the discussion in the IETF. The 2021 awards were accepting nominations for the ANRP 2021. The nomination deadline is the 22nd of November, which is this Sunday. So if you know of any good recent work in applied networking, any good ideas, any good people who would be good to bring to the IETF and the IRTF meetings, then please go to the ietf.org/ANRP website and nominate that work. We accept third-party nominations where you nominate somebody else's work, but also self-nominations. So if you think you've done some good applied networking research, please nominate your own papers as well. Next slide, please. We also have the final three ANRP prize-winning talks for 2020 happening in the IRTF open meeting on Friday this week. The talks are from Deborah Pam, who will talk about the design of network topologies for low Earth orbit satellite constellations, such as SpaceX's Starlink. From Georgia, who'll talk about her work on internet transparency, and from Anisha, who'll talk about congestion control fairness. These look like three really nice talks, so I would encourage you to finish off your IETF week in the last slot on Friday by coming and listening to these talks in the IRTF open meeting. Thank you.
Well, hopefully y'all can hear me. I have no idea if I am sending any video, but I did click the button.
Yeah, we have video and audio.
Oh, great. Okay, so the NomCom. It has been actually a real pleasure this year. You know, I mentioned I was going to put Andrew Sullivan on call block, but that's really only a joke, Andrew. I don't mean it. Are y'all controlling? Can you move forward? Anyway, yeah, we have truly a wonderful NomCom group this year. It's been a real pleasure working with these people, and the set of nominees that we got. Is it something on my end? I'm going to turn off the video just in case. I'm getting echo. So, crap. So you can still hear me because I'm getting echo. Okay, so I will just keep going. I don't see the slides anymore, but I'll just pretend you do. It's been a great set of participants.
So I'm not getting audio from Barbara anymore. Maybe we should move on to the next and come back to the non-com.
I'm back, and I'm
Oh,
only
okay.
going to try audio this time. Okay, so I'll just be quick. We have done almost all of their interviews. We have only one more interview scheduled. Community feedback does end Friday. If there's anything else you want to say, please get it in. We are looking at all of the feedback we receive and we're reading it carefully. And there's the website in case you've missed it as to where to provide feedback. And feel free to choose your definition of Friday because I get to push the button and I'm not pushing it until Saturday. So if we move on, I did want to just give you all a heads up on this is the remaining schedule that we're intending to abide by. It's sort of a traditional schedule. We really want to be free for the holidays, so we are trying to get things done, and we're totally on track and on schedule. And so the last thing I really wanted to provide you with, well, the penultimate, is some statistics on the next page. Just, we love our statistics, so I thought I'd just provide you with a bit of food for thought. As to where the nominees are coming from according to Calendly. Now, admittedly, Calendly is basing it on the IP address, and some people were coming in through corporate VPNs. And so their corporate VPNs, if they were working for a US company, may have represented them as US, even if they were, for example, in India. But nonetheless, this is just something to think of. As we look at who is actually attending IETF versus who is standing for the positions, and maybe we need to do a little something as a community to try and have our leadership, even the people standing for leadership positions, more representative of the community. If we consider our statistics representative of the community, we're, even in a North American meeting, only half of the people came from North America. So I'm just going to have a little bit of soapbox because y'all gave me this platform. So on the next slide is my soapbox of maybe we as a community can do just a little bit more to look around us, especially those of us who've been here a while and who aren't in leadership positions, because I don't think that mentoring is something that is the job of the leadership necessarily. I think it's the job of the community, especially if we have a bottom-up driven community model. So look around you. Look at the people who are taking minutes. Look at the people who are writing drafts and say, I think maybe that person could make a good working group chair. Reach out to them. Say, I think you could make a good working group chair. And maybe offer to chat with them on a monthly basis, understand what roadblocks they're facing in IETF, what are their hopes in IETF, do they want to maybe consider becoming a working group chair, and see what we can do, who've been around for a while, to remove the barriers so that they can get their RFCs published, so they can become working group chairs. And please, let's together as a community build a pipeline. Thank you. That's all I have.
Hello, everyone. Next slide, please. So, and next slide, thank you. So I want to start off by thanking Cisco, who have been the hosts of this meeting. It's often very difficult for, when we have virtual meetings or online meetings, for hosts to get the same level of benefits as they get in in-person meetings. But our hosts have recognised that they need to support the IETF and that there are still ways in which we can deliver benefits. So it's very good that they're continuing to support us. So thank you very much, Cisco. Next slide, please. And thank you to Huawei, our gold sponsor for this meeting. And thank you to Fastly, who are our silver sponsor. You'll notice that it says diversity and inclusivity there. We are shifting the way that we offer sponsorships away from just general meeting sponsorships towards more value-based sponsorships, because we've heard from our sponsors that that gives them something more tangible to sponsor. And so this is we're sort of in a halfway stage at the moment, so thank you to Fastly for picking up one of our new value-based ones. Next slide, please. Thanks to our bronze sponsors, Affilias and ICANN. ICANN splitting across two of our categories, Running Code one, which covers the hackathon, and the Hackdown Happy Hour when we go back to those, and the diversity and inclusivity sponsorship as well. And thank you particularly to the fee waiver sponsors, Cisco, Google and FutureWay, who have made that possible this time. Thank you. Next slide. And thank you to the equipment sponsors. People don't really know this as much, but Cisco in particular and Juniper as well donate an extraordinary amount of equipment to us. The list price is mind-boggling, and without that we simply couldn't afford to run the meetings in the way we currently do. So thank you very much for that. Next slide, please. And while we're not in Bangkok, THNIC, the local sponsor, put a great deal of work into us being in Bangkok. So thank you very much to them. Thank you. Next slide, please. We had over the weekend the code sprint. So thank you to the volunteers for that. And again, we'd like to thank the NOC, and a brief apology that last time when we thanked the NOC, the affiliations weren't shown, which is important to NOC members given the amount of time that their employers allow them to spend on the NOC activities and the amount that they support them. So thank you very much to all the NOC members and their employers as well. Next slide, please. And here are all of the hardworking meeting staff and contractors, the many secretariat people, the NOC people, the Meet Echo people, the tools team, and the LLC staff. Thank you very much to all of those people. Next slide, please. So IETF 110, as Alyssa said, is coming up on the 8th to 12th of March 2021, a little bit earlier in the month. We'll be announcing the IETF 110 host soon when the contracts are finally signed, and we have more sponsorship opportunities available. So please reach out if you're interested in one of those. Next slide, please. And thank you to all of our global hosts. So that you know, our global hosts sign up for a contract with us generally 6 to 9 years. They pay us annually as part of that, and then they host a meeting generally once every 3 years as part of that. So their support to us is where a significant portion of our money comes from. Thank you very much to Cisco, Comcast, Ericsson, Huawei, Juniper, NBC Universal and Nokia. Thank you. Next slide, please. So future meeting locations and venues. This is looking a little bit sparse. We're not showing as much as we normally do here because we've we're still in the process of renegotiating the meetings that we've moved. So renegotiating moving Bangkok to another slot and moving Prague, which would have been 110, to another slot as well. And so those things are taking a bit of time. So for the moment, we can show that we have 110 next online meeting. Then in July of next year, we have San Francisco booked, where hopefully will be the first time we'll all meet again in person. And then at the end of the year, Madrid, which is of course a rebooking from the previous cancellation. And then one not yet booked in Asia, but you can guess what we're aiming to do there, I imagine. And then Philadelphia for after that. Thank you. Next slide, please. So my registration numbers don't quite agree with Alyssa's. We take them at slightly different times, but what you can see here is the registration numbers compared to budget. And as you can see, we've done better than budget. If we take out the fee waivers, we've done like 100 plus more than budget. So that's been very useful to us. And it shows that we're getting reasonably good at understanding how many people we think will attend online meetings and having the right capacity for those meetings. Next slide, please. So I'm going to take a bit of time just to give you some final remarks now. I've been in the job just over a year now, and it's been a particularly eventful job. I've met many of you, but COVID has meant, of course, hindered that. And I think the effects of COVID have actually been quite deep. I'm not sure we've all really understood just how deep they have. I think we're all having daily stress from lockdowns and seeing people suffering, but we're also having a big impact from a lack of in-person meetings. One of the effects of that is I think we all get quite focused and quite serious because we don't give ourselves enough time for the human interactions. Clearly the meetings don't have the same energy as in-person meetings do, where we don't have the sort of side chats, we don't have the social side of it and those things. And I think it's quite clear that everyone's finding it increasingly hard, and we're all really looking forward to meeting in person. And certainly that's what the people are telling me and what the stats are showing. And another big event and big change this year has been the ramping up of activity from the LLC. We have, as you've seen, initiated multiple surveys to provide evidence for decision making. There have been multiple consultations on new policies. Some of those have had some initial missteps that have needed correction, but generally feel that's worked well. Now, much of this was to meet our compliance obligations, either to ISOC and or the law, but we do understand that this sort of feels very corporate. But I just want you all to be sure that this is not a shift in focus to us. This is, as someone said to me the other day, the IETF has built up a lot of management debt that needs to be repaid. So this is just a hump we're going through, and then I think things will then be back to a less corporate cycle. Now, as I'm sure you all know, recently, after many years contributing to the IETF, Henrik Lefkowitz has chosen not to renew his contract, and I know this has caused many of you concern. So I want to assure you all that the LLC is fully committed to treating everyone that contributes to the IETF, whatever their role, with respect and as people, not as disposable resources. It's a very clear focus of ours. I also want to assure you that we're not hiding disputes and tensions behind the scenes. I was as surprised as anyone else by this development. Before I talk about how we aim to prevent such any upset in future, I want to talk a little bit more broadly about volunteers. It's absolutely clear that a volunteer-driven IETF, including the key operational areas of the tools and the NOC, is the best way forward. Volunteers bring a real passion for the work. There's an unmatched breadth of expertise within the IETF. And volunteers bring an incredible diversity of solutions. As we've seen, so much of what the IETF has been built by a volunteer who thought that the IETF needed it or could that it fixed a problem. And so I want to be quite clear: the IETF, the LLC, does not want to replace volunteers with staff, contractors, and managed services. That's not our plan at all. We also don't want to see an opaque migration of volunteers into contractors, as happened a bit in the past. So with that in mind, thinking about how we prevent another upset such as has happened with Henrik, I think you need to be sure that we're going to continue to follow the principles the community has set for us, particularly the one about radical transparency, so that we're all working off the same data, so that we're publishing everything as much as possible there. And with the help of some IAB and IESG folks, we'll be seeing how other groups tackle the similar issues of how contractors who are volunteers, or the other way around, or how that whole area works together, and how you ensure that things remain volunteer driven when you start to bring contractors into the mix as well. So look, that's a lot to take in all at once, delivered reasonably quickly. This has, as I said, been a very eventful year, and I'm sure there'll be questions about this later on, yippee. But I'm always happy for a one-to-one chat in person or by email if anyone wants to talk about any of that as well. Thank you. Next slide.
Great, thank you, Jay. Hopefully you can hear me all right. Let me just check the chat window. I know this is the classic question everyone asks. Great, perfect.
Jason, your audio just dropped out.
All right, can you hear me now? Is that better?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
All right, thank you. Yes, thank you. This is, so Jason Livingood, this is the update for the LLC board. These are the folks that serve on the board. You've seen this slide many times now. Next slide. And these are the times that we meet. We publish months in advance our meeting schedule, and I would encourage anyone interested to show up. Just as a minor note here, we almost never have anyone from the community attend our board meetings. We would love it if you did. We have a section where we take Q&A at the end of the open sessions, and we try to publish our agendas well in advance, and we are adaptive to any new subjects that come up, and add them dynamically to the end of the agenda as well if needed. So these are the upcoming meetings. Next one is on 10th of December. Next slide, please. So before I get into the recent board work completed, I think it's important to go back and just level set, what does the IETF LLC do? And I always recommend referring back to RFC 8711. And the responsibilities that are laid out there are really 5 things, 4 of the key things, and then 1 on the side. The 4 key things are maintaining the operations, meeting and non-meeting operations of the IETF. So basically keeping the lights on, making sure that events like this come off all right. 2, managing the finances of the organization. 3, fundraising on behalf of the organization. And 4, compliance. So compliance with relevant tax and other laws and regulations and so on. And then the last side thing, which is not in that bulleted list of responsibilities, is to address a lot of the design recommendations that arose during the IASA 2 process. And so there's another draft that's linked off from 8711 that bears reading as well. And so we look at that for the areas that we are intended to focus on. And so in terms of the recent work completed, to tie that back, probably the first here is our most important activity. I've personally spent most of this year focused on this one issue because it's incredibly strategic, and that is the continuation of the process of working with ISOC to renew their financial commitment to the IETF. And those of you may recall that when the LLC was formed, there was an initial agreement with ISOC to provide 2 years of funding, and that funding ends at the end of this calendar year. And so without that financial lifeline, we would obviously have a significant financial issue in operating the LLC. and therefore the IETF. And so we've spent a great deal of time working through with ISOC and their board how we should move forward together, and we expect to have an announcement within the next couple of weeks. So that is moving to a good conclusion, I think. And I think you'll see when that comes out that it's a very, very important one. And like I said, it'll be apparent the amount of time that we've invested in that and why. Secondly, and this flows from the first one, is we have been preparing to implement a fundraising and sponsorship strategy. Some of those sponsorship changes you've seen Jay articulate or heard him articulate earlier, focused on the diversity inclusion sponsorship, for example. There'll be some other funding and sort of sponsor opportunities announced in the future as well. But we are preparing to bring on a resource to assist with fundraising, and there'll be a lot more explanation in the next couple of weeks to explain why and explain the opportunity that's in front of us and the need and so on. And then third, we wrapped up a statement on competition law. It was really an update of prior guidance that we had provided, but there were some questions from the community about that, and so we provided a clarification. But like I said, there's been a significant amount focused on 1 and 2. And then, of course, obviously, as you'll see, I think on the next slide, if you can move one ahead, focused on the ongoing effects of the coronavirus. So the inability to meet, having to deal with cancellation of contracts or calling of clauses for rescheduling, or working with insurance companies on claims and so on. There's just been an enormous amount of administrative, financial, and legal work that has gone into all of that, and then planning ahead for when could we move meeting locations that we have previously and have had to cancel, and when would that be moved to the future, and so on. As a result of that, over the summertime in the U.S. and North America, we had a meeting and we discussed reforecasting the budget. And in essence, the challenge that we faced here was that we had a budget that supposed that we were meeting in person 3 times, and that is where our major costs and revenues were driven from. But since we knew it became clear that it wasn't going to be possible to meet in person, we felt that a reforecast of the budget to reflect that reality would be appropriate, and then that would help us manage a bit better. I think the good news overall is that despite the difficulty in adapting to the situation, and particularly as compared to many other organizations, we have not had a significant material financial problem as an organization. We have in the forecast budget, some losses here. We're pending some insurance claims related to the canceled meetings, and thank goodness that we had some of those insurances in the first place. But the good news is that we are not facing a massive financial crisis as a result of our inability to meet in person, and we've been able to very quickly pivot to online meetings and have some reduced fees as a result of them, and maintain sponsorships from a lot of the generous sponsors that have been with us for years, as well as new ones. And so I think it's very important to reflect that we've done well given all of this tremendous uncertainty, and from a financial standpoint, and that we are in a better position, therefore, hopefully, as we emerge from that issue in 2021 at some point. Next slide. Here are all the ways to reach us. These are also on our web pages, nothing new here. And feel free to reach out at any time. As I said, in terms of the meetings, we encourage folks to join meetings and ask questions, share feedback, etc. At the same time, encourage people to send us email. We almost never receive email from folks in the community with questions or feedback, and we certainly request that and encourage it. Next slide. So that's it for now. Thank you very much, and we'll be back for Q&A.
So we have a memorial segment. We had very sadly, since the last meeting, the passing of Jim Schad, a very longtime contributor to our community, friend to so many, and a real inspiration. And I've asked Russ Housley to say a few words about Jim for us.
Thank you. So many of you know that Jim passed on the 3rd of October. I met Jim in the mid 1990s. At that time, Jim worked for Microsoft, and we met at a workshop that was organized by RSA Data Security on email security. The workshop was to determine whether a single email protocol could meet the needs of commercial and government, especially military users. It turned out that a single protocol could work for both communities, and as a result, RSA Data Security gave change control of the SMIME specification to the IETF to make that happen. I ended up chairing that working group, and Jim was very active in the working group, and he implemented SMIME in Microsoft Outlook. It's my understanding 20 years later, much of Jim's code is still used in Outlook today. Jim was passionate about the IETF, and he stayed involved even after he left Microsoft. He basically retired when he left Microsoft, but in addition to his passion with the IETF, he had a passion for wine. And so Jim started August Cellars, named for his father, on the family farm. And as a result, Jim was very difficult to find when the grapes were in need of crush, and thus the point of the picture. But otherwise, he remained very active in the IETF simply because he enjoyed it. And so he just did that and focused his time on his two passions, the internet and wine. So over the years, Jim was the author of 29 RFCs, and there's actually 3 more in the RFC editor queue. And most of these documents are related to SMIME and PKIX and COSE and CBOR. And he also contributed to Jose. He remained to the end very active as an IANA expert, and he also chaired the ACE working group and the CBOR working group, and was part of the IoT directorate. Jim was also a member of the tools architecture and strategy team. In fact, he wrote many of the tools that are now used by the RFC editor for handling the new XML format. Many times when a newcomer came to the IETF, Jim was a warm and welcoming presence. He was very quick to share experiences and about his journey, and it made him a wonderful mentor to some of the newcomers. Whenever I worked with Jim on a technical specification, he was always very polite in highlighting my mistakes. And it's not because he was trying to, show that he was smarter than anyone else. He just wanted to make sure that the specification was right. And he was always very generous with his time and his knowledge. And I can remember a few examples where he was asked to review a document, and how he did the review was he wrote an implementation and told the person where more detail was needed in order to ensure interoperability. In July 2019, I was lucky enough that I got to visit the Jim's winery in Oregon, and I got to see how proud of it he was. And his goal was, I just want to make wine that people want to drink. And I think that that is so similar to the, we just want to make an internet that people want to use. So that's the kind of thing that Jim did all the time. Jim was born the same year that I was, in 1959. And the first IETF in 2019, we got together and just had dinner and said, you know, congratulations. We had both in earlier years had some health issues, and we believe they were behind us. And we were basically just toasting good health and getting together at the IETFs. And it was very, very nice to have done that. I'm just sad to find out that he was wrong about everything being fine. And I miss him greatly. And I would appreciate it if you would just join me in a moment of silence for Jim. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Russ. A huge loss for us. And now we're going to turn to the Jonathan B. Postel Award. I think we have Andrew Sullivan joining us. We're not sure if he's connected. Okay, well, why don't we queue up the video for the award winner.
Very excited to be here to honor the remarkable achievements of an inspiring individual who like all Postel recipients before him, and like John Postel himself, spent decades pushing the boundaries to pioneer and promote ways to make the internet affordable, accessible, and relevant to humanity.
I'm speechless. Thank you very much, Isaac. Thank you very much, Internet Society, for everything here. We have a lot of balloons, a lot of things, and also this crystal ball. So thank you very much, to Internet Society. It is an honor to receive the highest and priceless acknowledgement given to Indonesia from the Internet Society. So thank you also to the Ministry of ICT of Indonesia. To be honest, all start with modified, simple, off-the-shelf gadget and equipment. Using this equipment, one may fulfill the right to access information and knowledge, which is the necessary foundation for any nation to move forward. As you can see in the picture previously, we can use very simple equipment to build the internet. ISOC has acknowledged the approach is maybe one of the right routes towards the internet for all. The job indeed not finished yet. Postal Service Award shed light on the way to go for all of us and inspire extraordinary enthusiasm for us to move forward towards knowledge-based society.
Indonesia is proud and excited to hear that Dr. Purbo is being awarded the esteemed Jonathan B. Postal Service Award. I know Dr. Purbo by reputation, of which he is known for his humility and humorous personality, as well as his outstanding contribution to the technological development of the Internet. His contribution to the digital sector is invaluable. Like the Internet Society, Dr. Purbo has been working relentlessly for the last 30 years to connect the people. And on behalf of the government and the people of Indonesia, we thank you again.
My name is Firman Syah Alfian. I'm Rector of Institut Dharma Jaya Lampung. In this occasion, I would like to congratulate Mr. Ono Purbo, PhD. He is our distinguished lecturer for the acceptance of the Jonathan B. Postal Award 2020. We realize that he is highly dedicated lecturer in providing the knowledge to students and our colleges, in bringing the nation and country into brighter, especially in internet technology.
I think, first of all, I'd like to congratulate you, but I think we've been knowing one another for a long time, and I'm sure you know how I appreciate your work.
The last 30 years, he's dedicated to the internet service, mostly in Indonesia, but anywhere in the world. It's amazing. So he deserved the Internet Postal Internet Service Award.
I wish to propose a toast to Professor Ono Purbo for his tremendous contributions to the growth of the internet in Indonesia, and for his general good humor and tendency to share his knowledge with so many people around the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Congratulations. Ono.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Oh, terima kasih Pak.
Sekali lagi selamat.
Thank you Pak Joni. Thank you. Terima kasih Pak Joni.
Selamat. Kang Ono, selamat Kang.
Pak Joni, terima kasih Pak Joni. Thank you.
Sama-sama semuanya, sama-sama.
Thank you. Thank you Kilnam. Thank you Bu Kancana.
Thank you for the excuse to start drinking at 7:30 in the morning.
Wow.
Okay, so that brings us to the open microphone portion of the plenary. We can go to the next slide. So we are going to start with the IESG, and we are not going to go around and introduce ourselves due to audio switching difficulties, but you can see all of us there according to area and all of our names. And I think we will be having everybody join us on video. We're going to attempt to have the full IHG join us on video. So come on up and we will kill the slides. So I think we have close to everyone, and if you go into Gallery view, you should be able to see everybody. And the queue is open. So if anybody has anything for the ISG, now is the time to use your raise hand button in the upper left if you want to get into the queue.
In the queue.
Okay, Kirsty, go ahead.
I just wanted to say thanks to the IESG for putting up a vulnerability disclosure policy, or looking to do that very soon. I saw the comments on the list and I just think it's a really positive step forward for the IETF to formalise the policy and have something public, and it's really good to see, so thank you.
Thanks for the feedback.
Kind of Christy, as you know, there's more work to do, but this is our first step in getting something out there.
Anyone else in the queue for the ISG? Okay, it looks like not, so we will move on to the IAB, I think is next.
Yeah, maybe we also put the site on for a second again. While people are studying the video, because that gives everybody the chance to also connect the face to a name. Because we will not make a round of introductions, but we can have people joining the queue already. We can go to gallery view at any point of time. I'm not seeing anybody in the queue. Ah, there's Jason. Is it for us or?
Sure, thanks. I just wanted to say thank you to the IAB for organizing the workshop on COVID network effects. Thought it was a great format across 3 days, had a lot of great participation, and really appreciated, thought it brought a lot of value to the community. Thank you.
Thanks for that feedback. We have Andrew in the queue.
Yeah, hi. I was also going to say thank you for the COVID workshop. I thought it was a great format. And on the other hand, I'll say a disappointing lack of bookcases for this particular panel. You need to read more. Maybe a note for next year.
Thank you. And we have Corey.
I wanted to say thank you for the IUB Open session. It was really nice to see a little bit more about what was going on inside the IAB.
Thank you for that as well. A lot of things. That's great. We have Mark in the queue.
With that, I also want to thank you for IAB Open, but I have a constructive suggestion, and that is that perhaps an hour is not enough. I found the question and answer session at the end really productive, really useful, and I also felt like it was cut short for a little bit. So perhaps scheduling it in March or a little longer might be helpful. Thanks.
Thank you. I mean, we had some technical problems this time, so it did cut everything short. We were also trying to not take away too much time from the working group agenda time. Wes, you wanted to say
An
something?
hour and a half might be slightly better. Yes, I agree. We were hard pressed for time to get all that in there.
Yep. So Gary is still in the queue. I think that's probably not on purpose. And with that, I don't see anybody else in the queue. I will wait 3 more seconds to give people a chance to join. Thanks. And with that, we're done with the IAB open mic. Thank you, everybody.
So I think we, oh, there we back. So this is the IETF LLC open mic session. I don't think I can actually see who's in the queue.
Oh, we have Michael Richardson in the queue first. Go ahead, Michael.
So I don't really want to talk about the Hendrick situation, but I do want to talk about tools.ietf.org on the fact that we seem to have a whole bunch of our infrastructure in various ways reliant on it, and it's kind of not really officially supported. And I just want to know what is our plan to kind of rationalize what we're doing here and figure out how we can have a single point of contact for issues that do affect us regularly.
This one up. So on the single point of contact for things, we are, as you know, there are currently multiple different ways that you can send a ticket through to people, and that all goes into various different queues and then into an RT system in the back end. The Secretariat and some people from the NOC and the tools team have been looking at this and are soon after 109 will be replacing that with a new support system, and will be amalgamating all of the various different email addresses down to a single email address, support@ietf.org, so that you can then see have a simple reporting mechanism. As to the tools.ietf.org, yes, the tools.ietf.org is, while it's named as if it is an official part of, officially supported part of the IETF, it is actually maintained and supported directly by Henrik with some support from the NLC and the tools team. And if that's not quite right, I'm sure Henrik will correct me. There is a plan that the tools team have for migrating various sets of services off that, and then when there are more things then that need to be discussed for us to understand where they go. While Henrik is stepping back from being a developer, he very much intends to carry on with tools.ietf.org, so we're not expecting any kind of problem there, but it is understood that this is what started as a space for people to experiment with tools has turned into an operational service for many people, and some work needs to be done to sort of tidy that up a bit. Should we go to Richard next in the queue?
Hi, good morning, folks. Thanks for taking the time here in the open mic time. I am showing up with my ISOC treasurer hat on, and just wanted to give a brief word of thanks to the LLC and the board, to Jay and the board, for kind of as Jason mentioned, one of the most important jobs that the LLC does is manage the financial relationship with ISOC. I think we've had some really good discussions lately about the ongoing funding of the IETF, and so I just wanted to thank the LLC board for doing a really good job of that financial stewardship and presenting a clear story for ISOC to understand and for the community to understand. So, thanks.
Thank you. I see we have David up next.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, evening, night. Can you hear me correct? Just right. Cool. I wanted to ask a question about bespoke tools. I've noticed in IETF, we have a lot of tools that are very custom built and specific to what we do. And I understand the impulse. Like I've built a bunch of, like not at IETF, but in other things like custom tools myself. And it's very tempting to kind of think that you're a special snowflake and nothing fits your needs just quite right. So you need to build something custom. But the problem is something custom will never reach the economies of scale that like a big provider of something else can do. And I would kind of like to ask you the question of like, are we making the right call here? Take tools.ietf.org, the main place that people use to read drafts and RFCs. It takes seconds to load a draft, which I still don't understand how that's possible. Or if you take MeetEcho compared to other VC solutions, we had, so I was chairing Web Transport on Monday, we had a like 11-minute outage. In IB Open, we had a 5-minute, like they don't quite work as well as more commonplace things. And I just wanted to ask the question of, is this the right move? Like, I think the MeetEcho team has been working really hard and they have like good things, but at the same time, like, I'm not sure this is necessarily the right direction that the IETF should be going in at this point.
Thanks for your comment. You want to go ahead and address that first? Okay.
Yeah, thank you. So David, I think that your question is conflating a number of things there, so I'll try to pull them apart and tackle them. First of all, the primary assertion in your statement that building bespoke tools is more expensive or more complex than taking off-the-shelf tools is, in my experience, not a simple assertion by any means. It depends on the complexity of your business processes, the maturity of the industry and software that's available to you, and various other things. I've been a corporate IT manager for decades and implemented these things backwards, left, right, and center, and it is not ever straightforward and simple. You have to make that decision based on a whole set of complex circumstances. The other thing, perhaps the most important thing though, is that our tools largely are volunteer driven. So there is no point at which there is somebody in the LLC sitting here saying, no, we need to get rid of Data Tracker and replace it with Salesforce. That's not the way that it's worked. It's been, the volunteers have driven the development of things and the way things go. Secondly, I think, well, next, some of the things about performance, certainly I think there are definitely some regular complaints about that, and that is something that we don't yet have the monitoring in place to be able to tell, and their work is necessary to look at those. So there's definitely an issue there. The tools team will know more about that. And then finally about MeetEcho, I think it's important, very, very important to recognize that we have asked an enormous amount of MeetEcho, and they have customized and developed their tool to meet our needs in a way that no other organization who provides a standard tool like this would do. We have also expected to have a tool that uses open standards as much as possible, so it's WebRTC based, and WebRTC, as we know, is still a developing technology, and particularly interaction with privacy and things. We have an XMPP based chat system built into which nobody else on the planet probably would use anymore, and we also have another thing about it which I'm struggling to remember, but it's very much open service, open standards based, which makes it quite unusual in that regard. And we have asked for and had a significant amount of customizations put in place for us. So the other thing is that we expect it to run on IPv6, and so we are running it on different cloud platforms, having moved cloud platforms, asked them to move cloud platforms in order to improve the IPv6 capability of it. So in a context where we are demanding so many changes and getting so many changes, there is inevitably going to be some fluctuations in things. It takes a while for these things to settle down and these things to put in place. But we have to make the trade-off of whether we want something that is so well designed for our needs, or whether we want something that is entirely off the shelf and works differently. And one other, just a final point here, because I see you want to say something, is that I think that we are judging, many people are judging Meet Echo by a different standard to the way they would judge something else. That we would not expect the Zoom or someone like that to make a customization for us. We would not be up in arms in Zoom if something were 5 pixels to the right, or something was using a slight phrasing that wasn't quite right, or we weren't happy about. But because we have worked with Meet Echo so long, because they make so many changes to things, we have had we have people expecting things from them that perhaps goes a bit beyond what that's possible. So look, so that's a broad answer to quite a complex question, I think.
Let me just add to that, if I could.
Thank you so much.
David, one sec, if I could just add to that.
Oh, of course, please do.
With other observations, one would be, we certainly heard in the process of discussing with ISOC, with the Internet Society about funding, the concern over bespoke or legacy or non-performing tools come up as a regular concern. It came up a number of times from their board and their community, and so that was a part of that discussion. And at the same time, in a lot of the IASA 2 formation documents, you can see in the design requirements document a specific section about tools and sort of technical platforms, I think, more generally. And it talks about the tension between the bespoke, sort of created tools and the more mainstream, scalable, or publicly supported ones. And I think that that's a natural tension, and as the organization IETF matures, it's natural for the community to ask those questions. Ultimately, it's for the community to make those decisions, and we are here to support and then execute whatever the direction the community wants to go in. So if the community got together and decided we wanted to move from one particular technology to another, we would be there to help in the contracting and going out and finding bidders or whatever it may be. But ultimately, it's something that the community needs to come together and decide. It's not something that we would decide and impose top down.
So just to slightly answer those points, if you will give me 30 seconds. So on the standards front, I totally agree. As the IETF, we have to, kind of eat our own dog food. That said, there is a wide pick of existing providers out there that support WebRTC, IPv6, many of that, and I'm definitely not advocating, go pick the one that's made by another part of my employer's company, but there are many of them out there that do this and that do this well. So on the community point, I totally agree. I'm not saying go do something. I'm just asking the question, and so maybe I guess that is what I'm asking. Let's ask the community. And then just the final point I'll make is I totally agree with Jay that it is a trade-off, where on one hand, we have the bespoke tools where we can ask for specific features. That's true. Like if you go to one of these big providers and ask for something completely IETF specific that no one else would ever want, they're probably not going to build it. My personal take is that while these IETF specific features are nice, they're not as important as reliability, in my personal experience. And so, like, for example, chairing a session, having the ability to have these, like the raise your hand tool was cute. And actually other providers have that. It was the like virtual humming tool that was cute, but I would personally much prefer to have a session, an entire 2-hour meeting where we can have a meeting, as opposed to having to reconnect audio multiple times and having it drop off completely as there. So it is completely a trade-off, and both standpoints have complete merits, but it might be worth it to open the question to the community to see which side of the trade-off might be best. Thanks so much for your time.
Can I just add one thing? I was struggling with my mute button earlier. Just that I think on this point about the community discussion, I think this works the best when there's like principal level guidance from the community. I think having the the community like pick very specific tools is doesn't really give us the ability to evolve at the pace at which we would want to in order to meet people's expectations. So I think like some framework that gives the principal level guidance around this set of trade-offs would be quite useful. And I encourage people to bring that to SHMU for the remote participation piece, because that's totally within scope of the charter. But trying to do this like tool by tool is just a rattle. So that's my plea for people.
100% agree with you, Alyssa. Thank you.
Thanks. I see next in the queue we have Andrew.
Hi. Well, two things. Firstly, I just wanted to say to Jay, and I put this in the chat earlier, thanks for covering some of the human aspects in your earlier comments. That was very welcome to see. So thank you for that. And then I was going to comment anyway, as it happens, on Meet Echo, just really to compliment the Meet Echo team on how they've evolved the tool since IETF 108, and maybe to balance David's comments. From my recollection of IETF 107, although I didn't have any issues with WebEx, a hell of a lot of people did in the use of that continuously through the week. So I think given the wide variety of platforms and devices and things that people use, some people will inevitably have problems, whatever choice of conferencing platform. To my experience, Meet Echo is the best of the mainstream platforms that I've seen. Worked really well at RIPE a couple of weeks back as well, and as certainly the feature set has improved a fair bit since IETF 108. So I think the Meet Echo team are to be congratulated, and I think it'd be a shame to move to a different platform. So good choice in my mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Next up is Colin.
So I think the answer was not really, I think it was a little disingenuous. And I think it comes back to things like, is this volunteer driven, or is this actually community driven, or is this driven by Jay making a decision? And I understand that's a complicated blend of all of those things. But statements like the data tracker was community driven is just simply not true. I mean, no, it was a group wrote a contract, and yes, some volunteers wrote it and whatever, but it didn't work that way. And around the selection of these tools as well, I do not feel as a community member that really that is, yes, maybe we gave some broad input, but I believe this is a decision this group's making. I don't think it's making a good decision. I think we should be measuring these tools by the ability to get the job done that we're here to do. And we don't, the voting tool could easily be separated out into something else. Every single one of the major conferencing vendors has APIs and plugins to adopt them and modify their environments into different things, but we don't use them. The statements about XMPP, WebRTC, IPv6 are categorically all wrong. It reflects not really a deep understanding of what these services are, or even having looked at them. So I think that we should revisit what we're trying to accomplish with these tools, whether the tools met our needs well this week. Every single meeting I've been in this week has had people not be able to contribute at some point due to Meet Echo problems. It has reliability that is so low it's almost unmeasurable this week.
Yeah, talk about it. I'm just barging in here because according to my view, I see myself at the top of the queue above Cullen. I'm not sure if anyone else sees that, but I also see two
That's
copies of
hilarious. That
everybody's
goes
video
exactly to my point.
because I started up the chat window in a separate window, and as I tried to scroll down, it Medeco crashed, restarted itself. I've now got a frozen copy of everybody's video plus a live copy of everybody's video, and I've got myself at the top of the participant list above Cullen.
What do you see,
I don't know if
Jason?
everyone else sees that.
Sorry, I don't see. It's funny. I don't see Bron. I don't see you at all in the queue.
I see myself at the top of the list.
Yeah. So
Anyway, I think I've said what I want to say.
Yeah.
I'll back off on that, and I will cede the floor to the other top of the list on
unreliable and
Medeco.
broken, and I was supporting it a day ago, but my experience of it in the day since is that it's been very unreliable, and Medeco's responses on the mailing list have been very dismissive and victim blaming about people who've been screwed over by its bugs. They said we restarted the server and everything just worked fine, and I posted them a screenshot showing that I had duplicate copies of the slides, duplicate copies of everyone's videos, and they said just refresh your browser. That's not really a reliable solution to everything, particularly given that I'm given a situation that says I'm at the top of the list, that I'm in the queue, but according to everyone else, I'm not in the queue. So the fact that I have an unreliable view of the world is a real problem. I'm going to refresh now.
Thanks. Well, as you're refreshing, and it points out the possibility of maybe as we work on our 2021 work plan, pulling in some sort of a tools assessment with the community and figuring out this balance. Jay, would you like to comment?
Yeah, so while I understand that there are people who have some strong problems with this, I do not think that the LLC can respond by simply changing the tool based on that. I don't think it is within the LLC's remit to do that. There has to be a community process that tells us what are the things that you think are important, what are the things that needs to be delivered by the tool. Possibly even a community process to choose the tool or something, and that is what needs to happen for us to do that. This is one of those things where we have a status quo. I don't know the history of how we got here, nor do I think the history is potentially relevant, but we are in this place now, and in order to move from this place, we need a proper process to do that. And I don't think, unfortunately, well, I don't want to be rude about it, but a level of complaint is not sufficient for us to be able to do that, because it is such a not quite arbitrary, but it is a personal point of view that others disagree with strongly. So we need to go through a rational process to get there.
So I'll just add on to what Jay's saying. Clearly we have the ability to help facilitate that sort of process, and there's also the SHME working group. So I suspect that we can sort out ways to help have this conversation as we move into next year. And we've certainly learned a lot more about our reliance on these tools as we've only been able to meet online. So that's helpful. Any other comments from board members?
Yeah. So I actually think the history is
And if you could ensure that you're muted and so on, that would be good. We're up to 124, sort of stopped at the moment.
Is the chat room working for you guys? Because it's not working for me, but everything else is.
I don't see any chat, no.
And I see 160 people, not 124.
Yeah, there's obviously some server load because there's people reporting authentication errors, being forced to log back in with Meetup with Data Tracker. So it might be correlated to the chat problems.
Yep, so we'll give it a moment to come back up. Just as a side question, we're 36 minutes after the hour. This session won't cut off and end in 4 minutes, will it? Will it continue?
No, I think they're not configured to cut off anymore.
All right. So we do see there are some people with their hands up in the queue, and we'll get to you shortly. We're going to just give it a few moments for other people to rejoin. My counter of people that are in the session has ticked up a bit more to 146 at the moment. I think other people are seeing different numbers. We'll give it a moment. So we'll give it maybe 1 or 2 more minutes. While we are waiting, Bron, I see you're not in the queue anymore. We've sort of restarted. Did you still want to be in the queue, or are you out of the queue? Where should we have you?
Pop back on. I see I'm on the other video camera now because Meetecho didn't let me select the one I wanted. That's okay. Reliability is much more important than a lot of things, and I think what we've found is that we have not had reliability at this meeting for pretty much any session. I've been quite lucky in the ones I've hosted, thankfully, but I've attended a lot of sessions that have had a lot of problems. I think that is a serious consideration. It's 1,000 people's time that's being wasted if something goes down, and I think reliability needs to be a more important consideration than even using specific standards. Using specific standards is nice, but working is really, really important. And I think we don't give that enough consideration. And I think decustomization is nice, but reliability and consistency is significantly more important. I found it was very difficult to report usability issues in my experience with the Meetecho test calls, which I have attended as many as I could before each IETF, and have pointed out usability issues that cause people to have trouble as they come in, and they haven't been dealt with. There are a lot of things I like about Meetecho, but the reliability of the tech stack is really important for a conference of this size. And I think we need to focus on that above specific technologies and specific features that we think might be nice. That was my main point. Actually, what I was in the queue for was to talk about something completely different, which is that I have had a couple of occasions where people have come to me saying, I want to bring this work to the IETF. Can you explain how submitting a draft works? And I have shown my MMark-based workflow, and they have found it very difficult to understand how to write a draft, how to specify what all the values in all the fields are that you're filling in the header information, in the tracking information, dealing with what's XML and what's Markdown, and where do I find canonical documentation that tells me how to do this stuff, and then how do I submit it, and what's the workflow after I submit it. I spent quite a while in Gathertown in a break between meetings today explaining it to a new person. I'm not sure that I have a great idea either. Someone's audio is now feeding back to me. Sorry, if you could, whoever else it is, could mute. That's quite frustrating. Yeah, so I think that area of tools is quite difficult. We have a very large barrier of entry still in our document creation tool chain. And I think that's a significant barrier to new people coming to the IETF to understand how to generate a document. And we should be looking at that as much as this is an issue for those of us who already kind of know what we're doing 3 times a year, but the document generation toolchain is an issue all the time. And that onboarding process is still pretty rough based on the experience of people who've been coming to me as new members of my working groups.
No, thank you very much for that feedback. I think we've heard the same. Obviously, Jay has a survey out about some of the tools and work processes, and that's helpful. We heard this as a point raised from the ISOC board when we were going through funding discussions, particularly as you noted in the context of new participants and it being a barrier to entry, especially when someone might be making a decision between, say, participating in an open source community or some other standards organization, and the barrier to entry can be high. So we understand.
Yeah, the final thing, while I've got the microphone here, to save coming back later, that I wouldn't mind floating, is that yes, we've had a couple of people leave recently, and it's difficult as a person who wasn't directly involved in it to know whether they left because they've been treated badly by the IETF or because they left because the IETF is trying to build some accountability and structure around a world that was very much everyone has their own fiefdom and runs it as they feel fit. That is a tricky one to understand, and certainly I don't have a problem with building accountability and structures and things. I think it's really important that people feel included and feel involved. I think it's also very important that we continue to build processes that are good for the IETF and good for everybody. And that will ruffle some feathers, I'm sure. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian. Next up in the queue, I see Eric.
So Brian said a number of things that I would, and maybe I could have video. Brian said a number of things that I agree with. So I have a few points I'd like to make, but I will do it briefly. First, I don't think that any of the tools we currently have were in fact selected by the community. They were selected in a bunch of ad hoc fashions by leadership at the time. That's not necessarily bad. I think in fact that's the structure. That's somewhat of the structure we should have now, which is the community gives guidance on what we're trying to achieve, but the LLC should be empowered to decide the kind of question of what tools we actually use. And so we should tell you what the priorities are, and then you should decide which video conferencing tool or whatever we use. So I certainly don't think you should ask the community, should we use MeetEcho or Meet or Zoom or whatever. Quite the contrary, you should ask us what our priorities are. So I think I think that, and I also don't think that we should have to wait 2 years for a long community effort for you to reconsider the tool chain. We should do the best we have under the circumstances. Second, which isn't to advocate for any particular outcome. Second, in terms of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs here, the most important thing is to get the job done, and that means having things that work reliably and predictably, and customization is a thing on top of that. People all across the world do video conferencing or other things like this without any kind of customized tooling, and so so while customized tooling is nice, it is not in fact the most important. The most important thing is things work. Third, it's increasingly expensive to have bespoke tools, and when you compare them to the commodity tools you can get off the shelf. I work for an organization which is a software development organization, and yet we've increasingly moved towards having commodity tools because it was simply so expensive to maintain our own independent tool chains of things when compared to the tool chains you get off the shelf that were relatively good. Even though, as I said, we're not as well customized and built into our structures and functions as one might have liked. Next, while I do think it's important to be able to eat our own dog food, I think we have a tendency to go overboard here. While it'd be nice to have every tool we use support every latest protocol that we've designed, I don't think that's the most important thing. Once again, I think the most important thing is to use tools that let us get the job done. With all of that said, there are a number of WebRTC-based video conferencing tools. So if the extent to which I'm very attached to WebRTC, I spent a lot of time working on it, and the extent to which one wants to use WebRTC, we do have a number of choices here. It is not only one. Thank you.
Thanks, Edgar. And I think I'm hearing from you definitely themes of focusing on reliability and productivity in the tooling. And certainly we have heard in the past that maybe at the time that some aspects of the tool chain were created, that there were no other alternatives or substitutes, and so things had to be developed, but that may not be the case any longer given your example. So thank you for that. Next up, Torlis.
Hi, yeah. So with respect to Meet Echo and the tooling, so I think it's really been, I think, a great history of us doing our own, eating our own dog food and developing our own tooling, and I think the same should continue to be done for our conference meeting experience, right? And so it would be bad to go to a model where we're only buying services. So I think it would be great to continue having a tool team, and ideally it should be independent of any given choices, right? So I'm not sure to what extent the Meet Echo team as an integration and customization team would be able to do that, but I think that would be my ideal preference, to basically have best of both worlds, right? Be open to integrate and use whatever the best starting tools are to not replicate work, but then also get the outcomes that we want with respect to our own customized experience. The other point I wanted to quickly bring up, and I hope this is the right place here, with respect to the timing of the meeting, I think it was a mistake to think that using a time local to a place we don't go to is a good thing if everybody is working in their own time zone, and the majority of the participants will likely be working between midnight and 6 a.m. in the morning. If we were to go on longer with the virtualized meetings, I guess that would be easy to fix and avoid the timing that we had this time. I think it'll be a lot more difficult when we go over, hopefully, to a longer term that's going to be a lot more hybrid, hopefully having a lot more people continuing to attend virtual instead of unnecessarily traveling, but also having a traveling audience. I think that's one of the big question marks that I'd like to see, some thoughts being put to whether it's SHMU or whatever the right places are. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Next up is Benjamin.
Hi, Ben Gaduk here. I had a question totally unrelated to Meet Echo or tooling. So my understanding is that mostly thanks to Ray Pelletier, we had pandemic insurance up through the end of this year for our in-person meetings, but we could not get that going forward. So are we at all worried about any risks that there might be something that happens and we end up significantly in the hole financially?
Jay, do you want to take this one? Jay, you're muted. There you go.
So it was precisely for that reason that we made such an early decision to move IETF 110 online. For next year, we have two meetings. We have the San Francisco meeting, and we have the Madrid meeting afterwards. We know with the Madrid meeting that it is possible to move it because we moved it once already with them, and they were good about that. The San Francisco one is not so clear for us yet. So the answer is there is a risk to us. It is problematic to quantify the level of the risk at the moment. The booking of San Francisco significantly predates these things, but the pandemic insurance was only ever bought a year in advance. I mean, it's fantastic insurance. Very few people had it, so I'm very pleased we had it, but it doesn't apply to that one. So that's the best answer I can give you at the moment. If the risk eventuates, then it is something we are going to have to manage carefully, certainly.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and I'll add, obviously we maintain an operating reserve to, help, sort of serve as a buffer on, unexpected financial events. And so, these extraordinary sorts of, circumstances certainly fall into that. And I think actually the most challenging period for us will be when in hopefully 2021, the world begins to emerge from this. And, that first meeting, may be the hardest or the most at risk, because maybe we won't be sure of, how many people can get there and can it be held, and therefore there may be some risk of financial loss there resulting from it. We'll try to manage that as best we can, but certainly at this point it's unclear, when we're able to sort of go back to some definition of normal, and we'll do the best we can to manage and push out as far into the future as we can those decisions. But depending upon the venue and the hotel and so on, some of those decisions may have to be made sooner than later, but it varies by location. But we'll see. It's a lot of uncertainty, but everyone's facing it. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for taking it on.
Yeah. Next up, we have Rudiger.
Okay, so let me start with the observation that MeetEcho and probably none of the commercial off-the-shelf products would offer a way of giving Hendrik the standing ovation that probably would have happened in a presence meeting. Further comments on this is from me is yes, the experience of unreliability of MeetEcho this time has been really a bad surprise to me after a very good experience, I think, in the previous meeting, including more observation of the MeetEcho team communicating with the ongoing conference. I was expecting that to continue, and I haven't seen that in a similar fashion. The unreliability has been specifically surprising to me after I observed at the recent RIPE meeting that RIPE decided to switch from a commercial off-the-shelf service to MeetEcho, and it worked really well, except that early on there was one failure, and the causes were easily identified and fixed. And there was a lot of praise for going to MeetEcho there. A tiny additional observation there is that for questions about customization and plug-in possibilities in MeetEcho, actually the RIPE meeting had a commercial off-the-shelf service plugged in instead of the humming tool or the hands-up tool. And well, okay, actually I didn't feel very nice about that service, but kind of that's all stuff that's there. And for this community, I'm kind of also a little bit irritated about the way we are discussing this, because in a community like this, I would actually expect that people would be asking for, well, okay, where do we get the report about what's happening and what has happened? I observed that in this plenary session, we did not have any slide, as far as I recall, giving information about the technical facilities and the usage that were applied to this meeting. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And yeah, certainly noted at the end, usually these have been the knock reports with the phone, things like Wi-Fi usage and number of phones and so on. So An interesting that. Thank you for highlighting. Next up, we see.
Sorry, can I just respond on the first point? Yeah. So I had suggested to Henrik that we would recognize him at this plenary, and he said he didn't want to do that. He wanted to wait for an in-person meeting, and so that's why we didn't do it at this meeting. But certainly he deserves a ton of recognition from the community, and hopefully that can take place at a later date. So just wanted people to be aware of that. It wasn't an oversight, it was by design.
Thanks, Tommy.
All right, thank you. I'll be brief. Jay, I wanted to respond to a comment that you had made earlier about the fact that there are people who do feel strongly about tools like MeetEcho in both positive and negative ways. So while I think it is fine to have community feedback for these long-term decisions about tooling, I disagree that it's a matter of opinion to weigh some people having good experiences with like the very factual problems that we've been having this week with MeetEcho. And again, like those opinions are good for long-term decisions, but I would consider that the current situation where we're forced to meet virtually, like this is, a very essential part of getting our work done. We don't have another option. It's kind of it's an emergency situation where it's not acceptable to just say, we're going to use the status quo if it's actually harming people's ability to participate. And we've been seeing that every day this week. And so I think, yes, let's start a long-term conversation, whole community about tooling. Let's figure out how to make sure that MeetEcho and other tools like that are scaling well. But we can have a temporary solution like what we did last March to say, we just need to put something in place to make sure that we have a backup system at least to ensure that IETF 110 will be successful. And like that should be our priority for now while we have these other discussions. But let's make sure that people are not going to be excluded or that our work is being harmed.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tommy. Next up, we have Rodney.
To Torles's comment and speak up for the people in the East Asian and Asia Pacific time zones. I'm in Japan, so it's 8 p.m. now. It's really nice to have the IETF meeting, not be in the middle of the night. We're going to be in a hybrid environment where a lot of the meetings actually take place year-round and in a virtual fashion. I think it's entirely reasonable to continue to hold it in a fashion such that at least a reasonable fraction of the meetings are actually held in each of sort of the major regions of the planet. Being in Japan, I'm sort of toward the eastern end of this. Bangkok is a couple of hours behind us. And if you go 2 hours west from there, you get to India, 2 or 2.5. So in this 4.5 hour time zone slot here, we have more than half of the world's population. I realize it's substantially less than half of the total participation in IETF, but if you don't have meetings that work for some of the people over here, you're going to have trouble getting the actual participation you want from this half of the planet. That's it. By the way, I actually really like MeetEcho. Thumbs up. That's it.
Thank you, Rodney. Next up, we have Henrik.
So as an illustration of a point that Jay made, that these things are complex, I wanted to mention that my understanding is that MeetEcho this time is running on a different cloud fabric than earlier. And what I've seen in the tech support internal channel is that almost all the issues that I've at least have observed have been related to the different vendor of the virtual machines they're running on, not with the MeetEcho software itself. So it's very easy to perceive a problem and point at the front end of it, but the actual cause of the problem is sometimes much more complex. I don't think that really is news to any of us. That's all.
Thank you, Henrik. I see an empty queue at the moment. Anyone else want to get into the queue? I see Richard in the queue.
Yeah, I just wanted to really briefly reemphasize. Am I sending audio? There we go. I just wanted to really briefly reemphasize a point that Tommy made, that there is a real asymmetry here between, I was struck by the contrast between Tommy's point and Rod's point. Tommy's point being, I can't participate because of something, and Rod's point being, I like this. And it strikes me like there's a real asymmetry there. It goes to this hierarchy of needs point that was earlier. Like, yes, like it's good to have tools that people like and people find pleasant to use, but it's much more important if we believe in the openness and open participation points that we espouse here, to have tools that enable people to participate and provide reliability and accessibility to the communities we want to participate here.
Thank you, Richard. And I'll just note, I think the board will have to have a think after this meeting in terms of some of our takeaways, but it's clear that a theme throughout this has been pertaining to the reliability and need for productivity of the tooling to support online meetings. And so we'll need to circle back and sort out a way that we can move forward with the community. John, I see you're now up in the queue. John, you're next.
Yeah, just two observations. The first is that I want to reinforce and support part of Henrik's point, and ask that the LLC think about managing some systematic postmortems on the technology of these meetings, so that we actually, those of us who are interested, actually understand what went wrong and what can be done to fix it for the next time, rather than responding as almost everybody does in the internet in similar situations by blaming the front end application or whatever it is you're looking at. And since I have the floor, I will add my own applause to the previous general effort. Thanks very much.
Thanks, John, and I think an excellent point in terms of what I will call maybe a retrospective or after action report. I know in my DevOps teams we usually preferred not to call it a postmortem because it implied that the patient died, and it was quite morbid. So I think we've got enough of that going on in the world today. We'll focus on that interaction. But your point's really well taken to do a deep dive to understand, how was each tool or each system that we were relying on performing? What were the detailed issues? Have each team basically do root cause analysis. The same stuff we do in our everyday jobs anyway. So I think that's really important to do, and it can probably then inform any potential next steps that the committee may want to take.
Agreed, and agreed about your distinction of terminology. Although with the level of outcry this week, postmortem might actually be appropriate.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Thank you. Touche. Spencer, I see you're next.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the people on the LLC for their service, because I note that much of this discussion 3 years ago would have happened during the ISG open mic. And that's got to be your service has got to be maybe more appreciated by the ISG, not being on stage for this than as anybody else. And when you and John were talking about postmortems, I think that our tools may still be perkier than some of the folks that are at this meeting, because I know I feel dead. Have a great night.
Anyone else in the queue? I see it as empty at the moment. I know previously I didn't see people in the queue that were in the queue. So anyone else on the board here seeing folks in the queue? No. All right. In that case, I think we can wrap up the LLC open mic session. Thank you very much for all of your feedback, especially all of the feedback pertaining to the tools and systems that are supporting our work this week. Alyssa, you were sort of the overall MC. I guess back to you if you have any other closing remarks to wrap up the plenary.
Nope, that's it. I think we are all finished. So thanks everybody for sticking with us.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.